This is Reverend Kelli Parrish Lucas presenting providing spiritual care to people with disabilities, including the serious brain disorders associated with aging. So that is the workshop that you've come to. I'm going to sit down. If you'd like me to stand up, or if I'm not projecting, please wave at me and I'll know what that means. Thank you for coming to Widening the Welcome today. Thank you for coming to this workshop. I hope it'll be informative, and in order to help me kind of make this more informative and maybe tailor it to your interests to the extent that I can at this point, it would kind of help me to get to know you a little bit. So if you could just tell me your name and where you're from and what interested you about this workshop, that would be really great. I'll pick on Mary Jo.
Turned out fair play. Yeah. I'm Mary Jo Brett. I'm a pastor at All Souls Christian Church in Los Angeles, which is a Disciples of Christ congregation. And I've had friends with a variety of disabilities my entire life. And now in the pastoral context, I actually made a list. I realized that I have people who suffer from depression, bipolar disorder, some form of dementia, and some type of paranoia that I don't know what the diagnosis is. So, for personal and professional reasons, I think it's going to be helpful.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Dr. Melinda Stenberg, and I am a psychological assistant, or better known as an intern in psychology. I'm working toward getting my license, and affiliated with First United Methodist Church of San Diego.
Great.
Pastor Susan actually married me. Didn't marry me, but she performed her back in 1990. So it was interesting to hear her history again. I read her book, but I'm interested to hear her history again. What brought me here is that I have founded a counseling center at our church, First United Methodist Church, Chula Vista. And so all of these topics, it was hard to pick which workshop to go to because all of these topics are very relevant and exciting for me to be here. So thank you very much.
My name is Christine Zachariason, and I am the senior pastor at Community Congregational United Church of Christ in Pullman, Washington, which is in eastern Washington. And I'm very interested in this topic for a couple of reasons. One is a longtime pastor in the community that I'm in, deal with a lot of different kinds of disability as well as mental illness, deal with a lot of traumatic brain disorder from veterans with post-traumatic stress to members of our congregation, someone just recently who was assaulted and now he's coming back from very serious post-traumatic brain disorder. And then on a personal level, I have fairly serious and once again uncontrolled epilepsy. And so to the point where there's probably neurosurgery and that coming up. So I myself, as the pastor of this very busy congregation, deal with traumatic brain injury. And epilepsy is a very challenging one because it is also a somewhat invisible, but it's not always a favorite when you have a grand mal seizure during church, I have learned. So, so I'm very interested in an ongoing way in this topic, dealing with it myself and thinking about how congregations deal with this.
I'm Lita Zachariason. I'm her daughter. I'm also from Pullman, but I go to school at Whitman College in Walla Walla. And I struggle with my own mental illness. I have an anxiety disorder, so I'm interested for that reason. Also, part of the reason, actually most of the reason that I'm here is I'm my mom's seizure cat. That's what we call me, but I'm here because she can't travel by herself. So on a personal level, caring for people with traumatic brain disorders is a very relevant topic in my life.
It's true.
It's true, yes. So that's interesting to me. And I'm also a student. I'm a religion student. So learning about just the passes of being a pastor and what that looks like and all the different elements of that is interesting as I look towards future career stuff as well.
Okay. Jim, can you introduce Ben, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Jim, and I'm better known as his dad. And today I'm his assistant and aide, and that's about it. So far he's typed, my name is Ben, and I'm from Ohio. My church is United Methodist, Christ United Methodist. And as he said, I got the information through the United Methodist Task Force on Disabilities, and obviously, this morning, the reason he chose this particular workshop is because he's very involved in the church's outreach, not only to disability. He has his own online ministry for children with disability. It's called CUB. Is that correct? And they try to raise not only awareness, but also get used pieces of equipment to give to other children in the community who might not be able to have it. But he is here today to take back information to the church and to get some ideas on how to outreach into the community. Am I correct? How to outreach into the community for to minister to people with all kinds of disabilities and challenges. Is that it? Anything else? Okay. That's it.
Okay. Dee, you're next up.
I'm Dee, and Bob and I are retired clergy in the United Church of Christ. We have learned that ministry goes on. It just takes different forms and different chapters. One of my key ministry areas is on the bus in town. I do a lot of bus travel. I've found that many of the people in our town who are on the bus have challenges physically. They have emotional challenges. They have brain disorders. So I'm here to learn. And when Bob tells you a little bit about him, that's also the turnabout is here.
The story gets a little thicker. But anyway, I'm also retired. And Dee and I lived in Port Angeles, now Washington. And we're active in a Lutheran church, ELCA, because there's no UCC group in that city, which we miss very much. But we are part of a group that's forming a support group and worship group that understands the United Church of Christ and is sensitive to some of the issues that we're concerned about. So I think I'm dealing with two different kinds of issues. One is when you retire, you kind of put it on the ship and just sit out into the ocean, buy, have a good time, bring home some fish. It's kind of like all the authority you had that was granted by an institution put on hold. It's still there, but it's not quite the same. And then I had a doctor now has the audacity to tell me that I have Parkinson's disease with dementia from Lewy body. That has to do with, keep saying, how can I prepare myself for the future? He said, we kind of have to wait till the future comes to find out what you're going to be doing. But there's an emotional insecurity, there's a bit of fuzziness about what you're doing, what's important in your life, and that's kind of the area I am. So, I'm trying to find ways of dealing with that, finding, well, I'm very, very, very happy and fortunate to have a caregiver in Dee, which she understands this. So that helps. But anyway, it's good to be here in Los Angeles.
Good. I'm glad to see you here. We're just introducing where we're from, our name, and why this workshop. So we'll continue with Nancy, and when we finish that back row, we'll let John introduce himself.
Well, good morning. My name is Nancy Styler, and for the past 20 years, I've been a social worker at a blocked inpatient level of care, different psychiatric hospitals. Through my church, Trinity Presbyterian in Preston, I'm on the Disabilities Ministry, and I co-lead Hope's Nest, which is our support group for people with mental illness. It's open to anyone, whether they attend our church or not. And I'm also the new coordinator for NAMI FaithNet in Orange County. So I'm here because I have a heart for service, and anything that I can learn or people I can meet or connect with to help me help others, that's my intent. So that's why I'm here, and I'd like to learn more.
I met you at breakfast, but...
Yes, my name is Moises Ponce. I'm a clinical therapist with the Department of Mental Health, County Riverside. I'm the chairman of the Spirituality Initiative with the County of Riverside, where we want to integrate spirituality into the mental health recovery process, meaning that we want to open a dialogue with the consumer, as we call them, to allow them to talk about their faith, about their need or lack of faith. And now we currently are going in the same faith orders. So part of our assessment, clinical assessment, has a question that inquires about what sustains you in times of difficulty, what resources do you have when you are in despair. And if they bring God, faith, church, any of those key terms, then we open a window in that assessment and we do a spiritual assessment in order to see where they are spiritually. If the spirituality would be another item in their recovery to put in the treatment plan. So part of my job has been working with the clinical staff county-wide to teach them about the difference between spirituality and religion. I was so happy with the keynote speaker giving it. I thought she read my notes. I said, when that differentiation, that's very important because our spirituality is informed by our religion most of the time. But at the end of the day, it's such a personal interaction between us and God, and whatever name you want to put it. So that's more or less what I do, and I'm in the process of opening a dialogue with the faith communities in the county, and we have all kinds of things. Maybe later I'll explain a little more. If you wonder about my accent, I'm originally from Ecuador, South America, and I live in Loma Linda, California.
Lenore here. I'm the pastor at First Congregational UCC in Sandusky, Ohio. I'm at the event for two reasons. Our church became open and affirming 2 years ago, and I just see this as another, I think, even more important step. And also I belong to Aquatics Club, and we have a club for adults with developmental disabilities, and I'm their advisor. So I want to learn more about that. But I'm in this particular workshop because so many of my members seem to have some form of dementia now, and I want to know how to help them.
Okay.
And I'm Patricia Wood. I'm from Northern California. I and my church both live on the top of a mountain over the Monterey Bay. And I graduated from PSR not too long ago, and I'm on the track for ordination. I started, my ministry is a group that I started in the mountains because we span 2 counties and we're divided by a highway in the other direction. And although we live in 2 different counties, we're really one big group, and we're more or less abandoned by those counties. They used to do ride share up there. They used to do different things. They do nothing now. We don't even have a bus. So people who want to age in place have a great difficulty. People who even have any kind of disability have a great difficulty. living in that area, and yet that is often, where they've lived for many years. And so we provide non-professional services, rides and errands and care and comfort, and I'm the founder and chairperson and also the spiritual care director. And I find that that the brain challenges that come with aging, are so varied, and I have a lot to learn about supporting people. And then there's just the general challenges of living with whatever your particular challenges, and if you already started with a difficulty in life in a personality way, it's even harder. And so I have a lot to learn.
Okay, John.
My name is John Alex Lowell. I'm a member of First Congregational Church of San Francisco. Also served the Northern California Nevada Conference as the chair of the Conference Inclusion Task Force, as we were procedurally called to develop one when we ratified, adopted A2A resolution in April last year. To develop ministry tools, we and the fellow members, some of which are here at this Widening the Welcome and tomorrow at the beginning day of the General Synod, tools to work with churches to convince them to self-assess themselves on how accessible they are, what we are addressing, and this relates to some other work I do with seniors on word and demographic tagging disassociation. I respect me. I cannot do it because I went what I went through 70 years ago for you. I do not have a disability. I just can't do it. What happened to me at Normandy. What is also a factor to address is how we provide pastoral care with respect for seniors and effectively give spiritual care when we say no. Unfortunately, some seniors I know, because of dementia, are given pity food and are having the double physical phenomenon of atrophy and immense weight gain. And they're becoming trapped in their wheelchairs. Just like the book and the film, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, about being trapped in the body because of post-stroke dementia. So what we can do, I want to learn more with you as our workshop leader.
Okay, so at this point we have more people, so I do think I'm going to stand up. And I developed this workshop for, I was asked by my CPE supervisor to come back and talk to the new residents about people with disabilities and bring that perspective. And it then went from that, somebody found out I did that. And it became a didactic for training professional chaplains how to do pastoral care for people with disabilities. And so I'm now morphed it again to kind of fit it to the needs of congregational ministers and lay leaders who also are active in providing care to people with disabilities. And so I said at the beginning that I am Kelli Parrish Lucas. I am a person with disability. I was born with cerebral palsy, and I have acquired chronic pain through accidents. So I come to this from personal experience. I also studied ecumenical responses to disability and did some original research in seminary, which is a lot of that is in this presentation. Professionally, I serve as a hospice chaplain right now. I did some training in a mental health facility, but my current professional focus is working with people at the end of life, and I serve a lot of people and families, members of people with dementia. So I'm also on the UCC Disability Ministry Board and on the Ecumenical Disability Advocacy Network. So a little bit busy, but I'm really glad to be here. And one of the reasons why a lot of what I'm not going to read the slides I handed out because I don't really like to do that, but I will be flipping through to kind of keep my place. And right now I'm on Y1 if you're following along. So why this topic? Well, don't laugh, Mary Jo. When I was in seminary, there was an assignment given. And the assignment was to read a book about pastoral care for a special population. And we had the option of reading pastoral care for Hispanic community, pastoral care for African Americans, or counseling lesbian partners. And I said, well, yeah, those are interesting. I can read one of those, but we also had the option to find something else. And so I asked, is there a book about pastoral care issues for people with disabilities? And the professor didn't know of one. So I went to the library, and long story short, it took the librarians quite some time to find a footnote in someone's unpublished thesis to direct me to a book from 1970 on the shelf. And another thing that happened during that class was it was a 3-hour class, and because I was having a lot of chronic pain at the time, I was standing in the back of the class one day, and the professor was talking about something, perhaps re-giving a lecture he'd already given because he did that. But one of the things he said was people who live with chronic pain are more likely to attempt suicide than anyone else. And I'm standing in the back of the room, and what do you think I thought? Well, I pretty much thought I need to figure this out on my own. And so I kind of went in that direction, and my interest in pastoral care really dovetailed with some of the other research I was doing into the ecumenical history of disability. And so I think, going to the next slide, the reason why this topic is important is there's a number of reasons, and I've listed some here, but people who live with disabilities, who have lived with it throughout their lives, we just have a different experience of the world. So it's part of our social location. And whenever you're providing spiritual care, pastoral care, you start with where that person's at. What is the social location? And I think we're just now, in the last 20 years, getting to the point where we consider disability as part of that. In the psychological assessments, in the social work assessments, in the spiritual assessments as well. And also, as I listened to the news over the last few years, we hear a lot about GLBT youth being bullied. Well, statistically, children with disabilities are more likely to be bullied, even than GLBT youth. So, and I know I definitely had the experience of bullying throughout my school years. And bullying is a really big issue because, believe it or not, it's not just kids who do it. Adults do it, and they're the worst. And very often people with disabilities, and I know I've had this experience myself, we get into the workplace, we're doing our jobs, and then someone comes along and, what just happened? All of the workplace dynamics shift because bullying of people with disabilities happens in the workplace. When I was using my cane for balance, I was told I could not use my cane in the ER or the hospital. They would rather I fall during my residency than use a cane. Or I was told I should not. So, and there's other forms of bullying that happen that are worse. So we have to be aware that the people in our congregation with disabilities, they're dealing with this every day. And I know I reached a place where it was so much I didn't know what to do. And there were a few people at church I could talk to. So we need to be aware of that. And then also we live in a culture of ableism where we don't know how to work with people with disabilities. We don't know how to respond to them. People just don't know the etiquette. So they do really stupid, hurtful things not because they're malicious, but they don't know. And we don't teach these things. And so we do live in an ableist society that judges people with different disabilities. And so as people age and their abilities change, they have all that psychological, oh, that's bad. And what is my life going to be like as I lose my abilities? And it does create anxiety. And there's also a part of internalized ableism that oftentimes I see people struggling with, and I don't think they're even struggling with it. And how can you have a conversation with them about it if they don't realize they live in an ableist society yet? So it's a very complex web.
In my work, one of the first reactions I had from some people was, well, you shouldn't be doing this because if people can't take care of their property anymore, they shouldn't live here.
Right.
How rude.
Yeah.
Kelli, how are you defining an ableist?
I have a handout on that. I'll get to it later, but this is a great handout. I'll go ahead and send it out now. And this is from the UCCDM resource booklet on becoming A2A. It's called Anybody, Everybody's Christ Body. You can download it for free from the UCCDM website. And this is one of the pages. I've taken it out and photocopied it. So, yes, this is, I call it my other Bible. So this is the curriculum.
On the page that you're going to be handing out, the website?
No, but it's on another page I'll be handing out. So here's the definitions of ableism, and we can talk about that more at the end. Let's make sure we send enough of those around. Mike, do you need a handout?
He needs the providing spiritual care.
Yeah. Yeah. I ran out of stapled copies. There you go.
Is that extra?
Oh, okay. So, I I want to kind of flip now to talking a little bit about the history of disabilities, because I think when we're providing care to people with disabilities, again, there is a social location, and so I think it's important to understand a little bit of the history that's relevant to people with disabilities. So in your handout, I'm on the slide about relevant historical facts, if you're following along. So when I did my research, I found some very interesting correlations that I'm still twiddling with. And one of them is that disability culture, which in the disability community you do find people talking about that, and there is a movement of arts and all kinds of things. It's kind of amazing when you dip your toe in what you find. But this actually really dates back to the end of World War I, when guys were coming back with new disabilities and not being able to find work. And so you do get the Disabled Veterans of America, and they were one of the first groups that really advocated politically for the rights of people with disabilities. So there's this really interesting correlation in the history between the return of veterans and the establishment of new rights for people with disabilities. It's really fascinating. Another key issue I think we forget about way too much is eugenics. A lot of people don't realize or don't remember that eugenics was a really big thing in America until the middle of the last century. It went out of vogue, of course, after World War II, but even up until late last century, you had different states with different laws about who could get married. And for a long time, people with disabilities could not get married because it was assumed that disabilities were all genetic and would be passed on to the children. So in order to create a society without disabilities, they just didn't allow people to get married. When I was born, I would not have been allowed to get married. So eugenics is a big issue. And it's one that the church deals with still, because as our medical abilities grow, we deal with issues of tube feeding and life support, and there are still cases coming out in the Carolinas of people who underwent forced sterilization. So, and these things come up when we do bioethics in the hospitals and hospices, when we're talking about end-of-life care. All these issues come up. So if we're not prepared to talk about it in the church, we're losing a big opportunity to support people at every phase of their life. So, and another sticky historical fact is that originally a lot of institutions for people with disabilities were developed by the churches as poorhouses, as charity homes, whatever. A lot of them were started in Europe by the churches. It came over here. And at some point there was a shift in the ethics, and we'll talk more about that as we go along, because that's a key point as well. But there was a discussion in society that not only the church should be doing this, but society as a whole should be involved in caring for people with disabilities. And a lot of those institutions were then handed over to the state to run. And somewhere along the way, either before or after that transfer, and sometimes both, these institutions really got a reputation for being very abusive. It's why when we do go visit people in RCFEs or skilled nursing facilities, RCFEs for you non-hospice people stands for Residential Care Facility for the Elderly. And it is why when we go into these homes to visit people who are dependent adults, clergy are all mandated reporters. And some facilities are very good. But there is a history where they were not so good. And a lot of them were shut down. A lot of the mental institutions, as we know, were closed in the 80s for that reason. So when you're providing care to people with disabilities, there can often be a resistance to institutions. And it's because it's in the history as being not so good. I think they're kind of in a different place now, just for the record. But that's certainly in the history, and you will find people in the disability community who say absolutely under no circumstances ever. And they mean it. And that's an issue of care. So, and it's also an issue as people age, and also in how do we care for people with developmental disabilities. The UCC still has standing connections with homes for people with developmental disabilities. So even though there's this not so pretty history, we still have that church connection. And so I think we really need to be aware of this history, because knowing your history empowers you to do better in the future. So the other historical fact is, again, in the 70s with the Vietnam War ending, a lot of veterans came back from Vietnam, and that also did a lot to make disabilities more visible in society. And then in 1972, the World Council of Churches actually had a discussion about issues of disability. And there have been some since, but that was kind of the first one. And I can talk to you more about World Council of Churches and disabilities stuff if you're interested in that. But just for these purposes, this is an issue that's picked up by the church and carried into the modern world. And of course, the UCC being a church of firsts, we have many UCC Synod resolutions. And I'm going to get a drink of water, but I think it's always important to know our UCC history. So I'm going to ask Patricia to start, and we'll just go down the line. If you can read the year and name of the resolutions.
1977, the church and the handicapped.
1985, full participation for persons with disabilities in the life of the church.
1988, affirmative action in the hiring of clergy with disabilities.
1995, in support of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
1999, the calling of clergy with disabilities.
You know 2005, John.
Oh, yes. Called to Wholeness in Christ, becoming a church accessible to all, commonly known as A2A. 2005, the 25th General.
I couldn't have set that up better.
This is 1999, calling the people of God to justice for persons with serious mental illness.
Oh, did I thought... Did I leave that out? Okay. Thank you. It is important, but... Okay. Yes. So the UCC really has been on the front of this. And Another important thing that I think really impacts pastoral care of people with disabilities is the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. Does anyone know what that is or why it's important?
Yes. It established benefits, but it was segmented to which forms these legal benefits and accessibilities and accommodations were to be provided in government facilities for government employees. He introduced the idea of the ramp and ASL and other forms of accommodations. It was the extension of that 17 years later that brought it forth to businesses, also known as the ADA. So this set the groundwork for modern forms of accessibility and accommodations. Within the format, though, of physical, it took the 2006 Mental Health Care Act to establish it for mental health. It omitted that. It was written, a friend of mine who was there said, it was written by a bunch of men who were blind or in wheelchairs. And that can affect how laws are written.
Thank you, John. It also did something else, which to me is just as important. And for the topic of spiritual care and integrating people with disabilities more fully in church and society might actually be more important. Hard to believe. The 1973 Rehabilitation Act guaranteed children with disabilities the right to go to public school. Before 1973, children with disabilities didn't get to go to public school unless they were in a very progressive district or their parents could afford to provide private education for them. So you get people like me who are the first generation of people with disabilities to have education and actually have the background needed to have access to seminaries and our academic institutions to do the research on how to provide pastoral care to people with disabilities. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, you're all with me. If you want me to say any more, let me know. I don't want to preach to the choir.
You know, I'm actually happy to have you say that because I know that in 1973 they actually tried to throw me out of the public schools because I started having seizures. And it was my mother appealing to that act that actually enabled me to stay in public school even though I was having seizures. So thank you. You just gave me a piece of my own history.
Yeah.
And 10 years before that, my father was on the school board, and that enabled me to stay in the public school.
Yeah. Right. Right. So, before the 70s, like I said, when I started this journey of what's out there about pastoral care for people with disabilities, there were a few books in the library written about how a pastor dealt with the congregation member who had an accident and acquired disability. But it was all written through that lens of not having the personal experience. And so it carried all the weight of ableism, which is that handout I sent out. So, the reason I think the 1973 Act is so important is that it did open it up for people with that experience to then come in and be critical about what was there, which was not a lot, actually, and start creating their own. And actually, it was, I believe, 2005, where this book, Injustice and the Care of Souls, came out. There's a reference on the back page. I think it was 2005. No, actually it was 2009. A few years after I left seminary. And this is actually the first time I found a scholarly article about pastoral care for people with disabilities. And it was written by Reverend Carolyn Thompson. She is a UCC minister in Massachusetts. And she wrote the Massachusetts Council of Churches Statement on Disability, and she's been involved with the World Council of Churches. It's really an amazing article, which is why I put the book in there. And also another book I've used a lot is also in there, Aging, Disability, and Spirituality. It's an anthology of lots of different aging issues and how they correlate to disability and spirituality. And that actually comes out of Australia, I believe. So some of the research into this topic is actually being done in the UK and Australia for some reason. Not a lot here, but we do have one really good journal article by Carolyn, and that has kind of sparked some other journals coming up. So the research is finally, the scholarly work is starting to be done. In the meantime, we're doing what we can based on incorporating this history into what we know. So I want to talk a little bit about theological facts that play a role in providing pastoral care to people with disabilities. And then I do want to talk specifically about dementia, because that's what we mentioned in the title of the workshop. And I have some scenarios in the back, which hopefully we'll have some time to sit around and talk about, maybe break into groups. We'll see. So theologically, when we provide pastoral care to people with disabilities, we're thinking, how does this person relate to God? How do they touch God? How does God touch them? And so that understanding of how do we touch God and how does God touch us and how do we learn about God from one another is theologians would say that's an issue of anthropology. And so at some level, when we're providing spiritual care, we need to think about what does it mean to be human in the situation of this person, and what does their humanity teach us about God, and what does God teach us about their humanity. And so there's another theological concept, Imago Dei, which means in the image of God. It's the Genesis story. And so how do we sit with people with different disabilities, with different mental illnesses, knowing they are made in the image of God? How does that change how we care for them? Particularly if you're a pastor or doing pastoral care, maybe more so than a psychological or other clinical assessment. When you're sitting there, what does that mean for them to be made in the image of God? And what does it say about God if that person can't speak? Is anyone familiar with Nancy Eiseland's book? Yes. And what is her famous image for God? She writes about God in the Sif Puff chair. Do you all know what that is?
I'm sorry, in the what?
The Sif Puff chair. Sip. Yeah. It's a type of wheelchair that's controlled by blowing on a straw that sits in front of the person's mouth. Yeah, sipping or blowing, if that's the only control that person has physically.
Title of her book?
It's called The Disabled God.
Nancy.
Iceland. So, as a chaplain, I deal with people from all faiths, but also all different strands of Christianity, which is really quite interesting sometimes. And I've found there's a lot of reasons in the different traditions that cause people with disabilities to be reluctant to spiritual care or participation in their church. As a chaplain, I often go in and will start providing spiritual care to someone who's not been affiliated for quite some time, and so I get to hear these stories, and sometimes I hear ugly stories about church. And so I think for me, I'm always aware, and I think the church does well to be aware that there are some theological abuses that happen to people with disabilities that make them resistant not only to church but spiritual care at all. And it may be a source of their spiritual alienation from a faith community if you're doing that kind of assessment. And so there are Christian traditions that suggest that death is preferable to disability. There's the story of Martin Luther telling a village to drown a 7-year-old epileptic boy because he was possessed. And people with disabilities may be aware of this, or they may not be. But for me, I always ask, oh, is this why? When I'm interacting with someone, getting to know them, finding out how I can best provide care. Oh, is this why? Is that a sore spot? And then sometimes I get in trouble with this last one. Sometimes I will tell non-chaplain disciplines or ask non-chaplain disciplines not to pray with people, which doesn't go over well because when you work with an interdisciplinary team, everyone is providing some level of spiritual care. And so it's really sometimes difficult for me to explain why I don't want other people to pray. And that's because I'm aware that prayer is often used as a weapon towards people with disabilities.
One of our seminary classmates had the experience of a young woman with cerebral palsy visited a church, and some stranger came up and yeah, she was embarrassed and appalled, and this person just came up and started praying that she would be healed. And, I mean, just horribly inappropriate. Probably, I'm sure the person thought you were
Actually, Huntington Beach, in the middle of the afternoon, they have those beautiful wheelchair balloon wheelchairs that cover on the beach. And yeah, a lady came up, very well intentioned, I'm sure, and wanted to pray over Ben. And so, yes.
Yeah.
I just had it happen last week, and afterwards, because I've had to let my congregation know that I'm going to be having neurosurgery, and so they knew this, and they've been interacting with this, and this person came in, shut my door, locked the door, said she had an ability to heal. She asked if I could see the angel over her shoulder, and I knew I had to say yes or she was going to be unhappy, so I was like, And she did this prayer, and then she said, you're actually not going to have to go through surgery now.
Which I thought that was good.
Because I just healed you. I just healed you. And I was like, so, yeah. I was also exercised once, which was exciting.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, congratulations.
And you lived to tell about it.
Yeah, I kept having seizures, darn it.
I had anything positive come out of it.
No, not that I get. Well, I mean, I think for her, that's the thing. And that's what I think it is that it's profound for the people that have the experience of doing that and walking away. But I really appreciate you saying that, because that is a real challenge when you know that somebody's going to embark. They want to embark upon praying for someone else, and in fact that what they're going to say is going to have nothing to do with healing for the person for whom they're praying.
When I have time, I would love to do a theological deconstruction of the movie Oz, just for that reason.
Yes. I think that Pastor Susan's talk this morning, and also her book, if you get a chance to read it, if you haven't yet, please do, but spoke of not looking for healing or asking to, again, pray for someone to be healed, rather to hope for to be able to embrace the disability or the mental illness or the
Yes, she talked about not finding a cure.
But
healing, which has to do with the community as well.
Finding your spirituality within you.
Right. And that's a good point. And that actually segues really well into caring for people with dementia, which is kind of where I want to move us now. I'm going to skip the slide about language because I think you can refer to that later. It goes along with the ableist handout, and in Everybody's Christ Body, there's actually a language guide. If you want more information about that, and we're also going to talk a little bit about this language issue in relation to dementia. So I just feel like I'd be preaching to the choir, and I'm going to forego that for now. So my main pastoral focus, as I said, is working with people at end of life at this time. That's what I'm doing. And so I've had some very profound experiences actually providing care to people with dementia, people who for months and months and months I go visit and they don't speak, and I walk in to visit and they speak to me. And sometimes it's God talking to you. So this can be a very profound work. And so I've been really interested in what is dementia. And I've had to have my own professional struggle of how can I best serve people with dementia. And I just kind of want to share that. But as I was looking at what is dementia, I found this on WebMD. Dementia is not a disease itself, but rather a group of symptoms that may accompany certain diseases or conditions. Symptoms may involve changes in personality, mood, and behavior. Dementia develops when the parts of the brain that are involved with learning, memory, decision-making, and language are affected by injury or disease. The most common cause of dementia is Alzheimer's, which is considered responsible for at least half of all causes of dementia. However, there are as many as 50 other known causes of dementia, but most of these causes are very rare. That's what WebMD does. In my work, I'm not so sure about other causes being rare because I see lots of different types. I just put that out there. it's not all Alzheimer's. It can be post-stroke brain injury. There's all different types of dementia. And they all present differently and have different abilities. So it's really, we're talking a continuum here, just like with any disability.
I'm asking this now in your capacity as a hospice chaplain. Do you see... I'm trying not to make this about me, and it's really personal right now, so I'm getting a little carried away, sorry. But do you see it sometimes as a sign that someone's nearing the end of life?
Dementia?
Yeah.
People can have dementia for 10 years at the end of life.
Especially now.
Yeah,
I mean,
especially now.
I mean, I feel like dementia is something that I think that used to be the case.
Yeah.
But also as someone that deals with people on a pretty broad spectrum, I feel as if now with dementia, it is something that used to be considered to be a piece of terminal illness oftentimes, and now it's something that many people are living with. Period, chronically.
Right.
And so it's actually really impacting ministry.
Yes.
Because of that. Because now we have gone from this sort of almost hospice approach to dementia to seeing it as, how do I minister to someone who, in the case of one guy that I minister to now, he's a professor at Washington State University who was assaulted trying to intervene in a fight. He's about 35 years old, and he has a phasic brain disorder, and he's got dementia, and he's now going to be living with this for many years. So, it's a real spectrum disorder now.
Yeah, but
it's changed it for us.
Yeah, and I think even with aging, and I'm glad you brought up hospice, because this is changing where Medicare is really looking at hospice now and really not wanting people to be on hospice too long. It's just 6 months. I think it should be longer, but Medicare, it's 6 months. And now that being said, sometimes people have hospice for longer, but that's harder for the clinicians to continue to prove there's a decline. So I think that's something that's really, that conversation is being had, because people do live for a long time on dementia. It depends on the type, it depends on the rate of decline, it depends on the care they get, and sometimes what we find with hospice is the extra care and attention and mental stimulation improves people's quality of life. And then my perspective is always, we don't know. Right. It's not up to us ultimately.
I guess, maybe let me clarify maybe where my question was coming from, because it was presented to me someone who had she was dying of cancer. She had cancer, and all of a sudden, this is someone I knew well, so all of a sudden she developed dementia. And I didn't know what that was all about, and I ran into a professional in the hospital, and I said, I'm concerned about the confusion. Do you think that's from the medication? And she said to me, we see that a lot in people who are nearing the end of their life. And which, slapped me in the face.
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared for it. But So now, as I see, I'm facing other people who are, dealing with. I'm wondering if is that like an organic thing? Like my friend had cancer, so maybe cancer had spread, or is it a spiritual thing that happens?
I think that's a question we don't scientifically have an answer to, but dementia can develop as. I've also seen it as part of other diagnoses. So it can develop from lots of different things. They don't know what causes it or where it comes from. And mostly it is associated with aging, but sometimes it's not. There's early onset too. Right.
age is not a factor.
Right.
We see that in the younger population.
Yeah. So,
sometimes people who are actually severely depressed get diagnosed with dementia when what it is that this, as was talked about this morning, this sense of no time, no space, no place, has enveloped the person. And then if they're just kind of cast off and, oh, well, they're just, then they don't get...
Thank you. Yeah, and that's what I was going to say on our next slide is this the statistic I found about the correlation between mental health and dementia, because dementia is a physical illness, but it has to do with the brain, so it is categorized as a brain disorder, but also I found this fascinating, and it made so much sense to me. It was like a light bulb going off. Depression affects 20 to 30% of people who have dementia, and about 20% have anxiety. So that's an added mental health diagnosis to half of your folks with dementia if you add those numbers together.
And all of those can come under an umbrella of Parkinson's.
Right.
Which doesn't leave
right.
alone.
Right. Right. Exactly.
To put a further quantitative analysis to it, what is a function of modern medical science is one post-stroke is living 20 years now. A factor of that time you have dementia is growing, so as a percentage of your life, one can have dementia. Percentage-wise, longer, and years longer. So that's affecting what you mentioned, Kelli, how the government is responding to Medicare aid. What qualifies under how many months, what you're in a hospice. And what Medicare does not cover mental health care. It does not cover psychiatrists. You need to really determine a doctor who can be open.
I think I've heard differently, but that might just be under the hospice benefit.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Tell me more later.
I'm aware of time, so I kind of want to be moving us along. So I'm kind of going to ask you, there is a part in here that I've written out some really fabulous quotes from Aging, Disability, and Spirituality. And this writer was actually working with a woman who had dementia and was a self-advocate in the UK. You don't get a lot of those. I think we need more of those. And she was writing about her experience of dementia, and so she talks about how important it was how people responded to her in the use of language. So I'm going to skip that, Pastoral Care and Dementia 3, and go on to 4, and I just want to kind of move us along and highlight a few things, because in here she starts talking about caregivers, and usually as a person with disabilities doing this work, my emphasis is on the person with the disability. I think my experience in doing chaplaincy and providing care to people with dementia is it really also involves the family. It really requires a more holistic approach. So I want to talk a little bit about the caregiving issues, and then we can talk about what specific things people from the church or clergy might be able to do in these situations. So I'm on number 4 if you're following in the slides. And in the middle of the page, right after 84, in this article I've referenced in the slides, the writer reminds us that spirituality of people with dementia is often based in relationship. So again, it's that imago Dei. How am I relating to God? How am I in the image of God? And I see this a lot. People with dementia, their spirituality is based in relationship with others, and that as caregivers for people with dementia, we have to face our own frailty and our own lack of independence to abide in relationship with those persons with dementia whom we serve. And I think whenever we really provide that soul-to-soul care to people with disability, we're dealing with issues of vulnerability, like Susan was talking about this morning, and we're entering into that space of interdependence. And I think spiritual care providers can do this more so other than other disciplines sometimes, because it really is that recognizing the humanity. And I love this quote from 85. Service providers who understand the language of relationship will encourage family members to continue visiting as a sign of human solidarity and a sign of the vulnerability and interdependence that characterizes all of our lives. So,
That's right where it's at.
Yeah. So I think I'm just going to share a brief story about, there's a facility I visit, and I've been visiting there for a while. And at first I was a little unsure, I'm going to go in and pray and provide spiritual care to an individual, but there's other people around and I don't know their spirituality, so I was a little shocked. Well, I don't want to offend their spirituality, and I eventually found I just had to go with it, because that's what it was. And so, but as I started just going with it and not worrying about other people who may be there who may not want to hear prayers or songs, I found that other people within earshot would start singing with me from across the room. And, people I didn't know, and people who had some kind of, for some reason they're in this memory facility. So I don't know what the diagnosis was, but they would start responding from across the hall, and then the caregivers would start in. And so it really did become this beautiful community. I'm there to see one person, and as I see them and I'm providing my spiritual interventions, there's community built. And so I just, I guess I share that so that we're not shy when we go out and we provide this kind of care, because we don't know, maybe that person doesn't have the same faith, but maybe they're still going to connect. And that is the person you're visiting, that is their community. You're walking into their church, their home. So I just share that as a little jewel of experience.
Those things that are, it's because the bottom line, the column, is compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who has suffered that's the starting point. I know in the bus community that I was talking about, that they get beyond the vulnerability they see me as somebody who's vulnerable, and that opens the door.
Right. Right.
In riding the bus, she's sharing their life experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right away, she knows exactly how to do this on the bus. All the preparation beforehand. I think that's, I meet with a group of people who just gather together weekly for coffee. And we talk about, I try to talk, kind of move the conversation to things they've done that they're proud of. And it's always something. Always something that says your life has been worthwhile, valuable to these people. And that's important for them to remember. They might not remember the next week that they shared that story. They might share it again, but hey, I might do the same thing, and they know that. So, grow. And they don't miss that time.
Yeah.
They don't miss it.
It's community. So I think when we do go to provide care to people with disability, people with dementia particularly, bringing that sense of community is vital. And it's you're not really there as just a friendly visitor. How you doing? You're bringing something that's going to connect them with a wider community. So I've just written some tips down because I think sometimes people are hesitant to visit people with dementia because they don't know what to do, and it can be really scary. I realize that. So I just wrote some things down. And can we maybe just have your voices be heard? Can we start with the back row and this time? And it's the slide.
Okay. Silence is okay. If they are nonverbal, you can talk to them, but don't fill the space with your words. Sometimes people with dementia need time to form a word.
Don't argue. If they speak about something that can be true, don't explain that to them unless it's clearly causing them distress and you want to soothe, relax them.
Avoid saying, "Do you remember?"
Music uses a different part of the brain than other communication. Oftentimes, people with dementia will know an old hymn or secular song, so sing it. Take the church bulletin and read it, or other spiritual poems or literature to them, provided it is short and age appropriate.
Let the family know you visited and how the loved one is. This can ease guilt and let them know that their loved one remains part of the community and connected to others.
And then I didn't realize it printed this way. There's actually one at the top that says, sit with them and imagine they are the image of God.
I love that. And that's something I never really thought of before.
It's appropriate that it printed out at the top even if it was an error. Most important.
So, do you have any thoughts about that? I was really touched one time when I was visiting a person and I would go and sing and provide prayers because I knew their tradition, and then the caregiver said, well, the church visits, the church, and then there was a church bulletin there, and then able to engage them with the church bulletin from their own faith tradition was really precious.
You know, we have within our congregation once a month, instead of having a worship service, this is kind of through the Faith In part of the UCC, we go out into the community and we do service. And one of the things that we do, the choir, the pianist, the choir director go to one of the local facilities.
Mm-hmm.
It's a graduated care facility, and they do music. And they take the bulletin, but it's really caught on to become this larger community. So there was a woman who I was just talking to, daughter whose father has dementia and has been there for a while, and she was telling me that she had come and visit her father, and I just heard this story at his memorial service, which I did last week. And she arrived on a Thursday. He didn't know who she was. This was the first time he hadn't known at all who she was. They went to this Sunday service where they were doing all the oldies but goodies in terms of hymns. And he was singing. So he started singing along. And all of a sudden he looked over at her and he said, "Susan, when did you get here?" It was the music brought him back in, and he knew everybody that was there. It was like one of the last completely clear days that he had. And she was saying that she felt that the church community had given her that gift by willing to take the time to just be there and be present. So music, it's amazing what music can do. It's incredible.
And I think that is a music thing, because music does access that part of the brain, but that's a God thing.
She felt that way. She actually felt that way. She was saying that for her, that was a moment for her that taught her something.
I see we have a question here, and then I kind of want to wrap up. Maybe we can cover one of these discussions I put in the end, or questions, but Nancy.
I just wanted to add, as I'm hearing what everyone's sharing and what you're sharing and the information in the bulletin and looking at my notes, something's causing me to be very mindful of something I know I'm guilty of, and I just thought I'd share it. Sometimes, helpful hints help others. I'm going to try to be really hard not to be self-serving. I'm thinking of everything I'm seeing, and I think as an advocate, sometimes I try so hard, I want to get my point across, or my intentions are very wholehearted to serve and to help, and I think I really need to be mindful of not being self-serving. And I just thought I would put that out there. If anyone else ever struggles with that, I certainly will take that away today.
I do have when I was writing the series Finding Voice, or the Antoinette Brown, I had permission from the family of one of the women to visit her, and I knew that she probably would not be able to communicate with me because of dementia. And indeed, she could not. And I wondered, what am I going to do? I had already written most of the chapter, but I wanted to capture the essence of her, hopefully. I went through, in being present with her, reviewing her life chapter. And then shared a brief prayer with her, but went into the Lord's Prayer. As soon as I started the Lord's Prayer, her whole personality came through, where she hadn't been able to form any words. She prayed that as if she were in the pulpit. I mean, it's one of those accidental gifts when we dare to just go in and not know.
And I think that's a good point, because I've found that I've been realizing that more too, Dee, is for some reason the Lord's Prayer, it acts like music, even when it's not sung. People who may not be able to put any other words together will mouth those words with you. So, well, I do see that the workshops are kind of moving out of their spaces into the larger, but are there closing questions or words that you have? I think
providing the handout.
My email's on the back, so if you need to get in touch with me, or if you need me to come talk to professionals, email me. So
I'm thinking about finding the community, finding a way to get into the church community. That one of the phrases that really bothers me a lot is "there but for the grace of God." And
yes,
the disability or the problem or the dementia is
Right.
to be anathema. They're but for the grace of God. Does that mean they're not in God's grace?
Right.
Wow.
Right.
So how do we get the community, the church community, to open, that's the big question, to open to people in a way that opens the heart, and the only way is contact.
Yep.
Education and contact.
And testimonials and metaphors, we can turn the barriers over and to make them into the ramps.
Yeah.
Design the barriers to use the same material that they used to say no and say yes.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I mean,
Good
that's
point.
Really important. I really feel. Okay.
And just kind of as the coordinator of today, I need to put that other hat on and say it is time for core groups. I love this discussion we're having, and core groups is another place to continue that discussion and process all the information we're taking in. We know Widening the Welcome is really a day packed with information, so that is your processing time. So I invite you to find your core groups.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Oh, wait! I have another handout I forgot about.
Thank you very much.
I've got.
Latest handout.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Can I grab another one?
Yeah.
Only one that is
It's another handout I forgot to give.
You forgot to tell us?
Yes, it's a handout. I can email it to you if that's easier, Dee.
Great, yes, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Parallel in Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Yes.
This one is the real big
Yep. You know, my first, when I was ordained, I was the chaplain at Parrish, and it's the story. You know, it's an interfaith school. And one of the first things that happened after I was ordained was a group of students walked to me in my office and tried to perform an exercise.